Ladies and gentlemen, you are listening to the Cheats Movement podcast. It is brought to you on the Family Podcast Network. I am your host, Cheats, and I am so excited to have a really special, and it's going to be a really fun conversation with how can I describe our guest? It's pretty difficult, but what I will say is it is very rare that you get to talk to someone in any field that I would consider at the top of their game and has a legacy of work that speaks for itself. So no matter what it is, it's very rare that you get to talk to someone that I feel like is at the top of their game and peak performance. And when it comes to design, whether it's graphic design, whether it's sports logos, our guest is clearly at the top of the game. Todd Radom is here. He is you may not know Todd, but you know his work for sure, because he has done some of the most iconic logos in sports history and working on a bunch of new ones. So Todd, welcome to the Cheats Movement podcast.
Cheats, thank you so much. Great to be with you. Appreciate your kind words, and I'm looking forward to chatting today.
I'm excited about this, and I've been looking forward to it for a while. I will tell you, you came on my radar. Your work's always been on my radar because I'm a longtime sports fan, and things that you don't really think about, like say a Super Bowl logo, or we're in Richmond, Virginia, the Washington Nationals logo. You might look at the logo and say, that's really cool, but somebody has to design that. And oftentimes, a lot of times, that someone is you, which is really, really crazy. Let's get into how long, let's get into the journey, because I think it's important. How did your love for art, drawing, turn into a lengthy and highly achievable career, and in particular sports? Because I'm a huge baseball fan, I'm a huge basketball fan. I know you've done so much, but how did your love for art, I'm assuming at a very young age, transition into where you are now with some of the most iconic sports logos of all time?
Well, I mean, a couple of things. Number one, I always say I was born at the right time, and entered into the field of sports design at a time when really nobody else was doing it. There were very few people involved in this. It was the early 1990s, and this was at a moment when professional leagues, every professional league in North America was adding expansion teams were moving, and there was a boom in licensing stuff with logos on it. But to back up even further, I come from a family of artists. I am a fourth generation working artist. My dad sort of cobbled out a creative career doing various things in design and photography and copywriting along the way. His father, my grandfather, was a fine artist and illustrator. I've got a cousin who's a jazz drummer. I've got a brother who's a photographer. So I always say that my creative role models were right there with me the whole while. And I'm fortunate in that I was exposed to art and design at a very early age. But at the same time, I learned pretty early on that you could make a living doing this. And wow. Not everybody gets the leeway basically to pursue a career in the arts. So I always say that I was one of these kids who was a sports fan, not necessarily a great athlete or by any means, but I always looked at sports through a little bit of a different lens. I'd watch games on TV, or I would go to, Yankees games and Mets games growing up in the New York area. I'd go to games with my father, and I'd observe what players were wearing and what the visual culture of sports was. So you kind of move that on down the line to the moment that I referenced just a little while ago. And there is being born at the right time, and coming along at a moment when, there was a need for the kind of stuff that I do and the kind of things that I'm interested in.
And so talk to me about that transition, because I think, especially modern day, I see a lot of, we're around creatives all the time, and there's more and more creatives than ever before. And obviously, I think folks, especially contemporary artists now, they might be able to carve out an album cover for their friend. They might be able to, even ones that have extremely training and higher education, they might find their way into an agency per se, but I'm sure they're all looking up to say, like, wouldn't this be so cool? There's like, expansion opportunities, expansion teams. I'd love, and we're going to get into some of the new designs that have taken place over kind of this, I want to say this year and last year. And I know that you have an opinion on some of those as well, but understanding that it is a different time than in, say, the 90s. What was the moment for you that you were able to say, hey, I can merge these passions that I have, a passion for sports, but also a passion for art, and really start to pursue kind of just getting some activity, getting some accounts, getting some work and in the sports realm?
Yeah, I mean, so I came up at a time when design, advertising, illustration was done traditionally. It was done with our hands, right? So it was shortly before computerization occurred. And I graduated from college in 1986. I went to the School of Visual Arts in New York City. And I started to work in book publishing, right. Designing book covers. And of course, New York being the epicenter of the publishing industry, sure, then and now, and also a place, obviously, the epicenter of advertising and media at that point in the United States. So there were plenty of opportunities to pursue design work. At that time, I was involved in doing hand lettering, literally lettering by hand. Right. And it was a very valuable skill. So I basically, even while working full time, I worked up a pretty good portfolio of clients and connections, human connections, people I went to college with, et cetera, et cetera. And anyway, working in book publishing, I was the guy who always was given sports books. Todd loves this stuff. Give him sports books, right? And nice. So I accrued a pretty good literal portfolio, which in those days was like a box that you would bring around your printed samples in. Right. And I found out in 1990 or 91 that Major League Baseball was opening up an in-house creative department. Oh, I read about this in an advertising industry magazine or something. Wow. And back in those days, you would literally bring around your portfolio, your box with printed samples in it, and you would drop it off. You'd call ahead. Say I want to go to an advertising agency. Well, we accept drop-offs of portfolios on Thursday mornings at, between sure. 9 and 10 a.m. I'm paraphrasing. That's hilarious. And you could pick it up after 4. And usually you would drop off your stuff and there would be a note in it, a pre-printed note, which would say, thank you very much for your interest in, we'll call you. Well, I found out about this opportunity at Major League Baseball, cold called, dropped off my portfolio. And lo and behold, I picked the thing up at the conclusion of the workday, and there was a note in it which said, why don't you come in, let's talk. Nice. So there was my foot in the door. It was with their first creative director, a woman named Ann Ossie, who just retired last year. Oh, wow. 30-year run at Major League Baseball. Yep, exactly. And she really, was responsible for the look of the sport during these incredibly important years, right? More teams, more stuff, the move to digital, everything. So got my foot in the door at baseball, wound up doing some work with the NBA, led to the NFL, led to doing stuff with business partners, broadcast partners, et cetera, and here we are many years later, and I'm still involved.
This is so awesome, because it reminds me the time you're describing, and I'm a big hip hop head, and it reminds me of DJs telling us like, oh yeah, in the 90s, I used to have to carry my crates around to do,
Yeah.
like when you're talking about the portfolios, like, yeah, we would go to the club. I would just have to bring records. And like now they show up and it's like, I got a laptop. I don't have to bring crates and crates and crates of records.
Yeah.
But there's something about that time period, right? There's something about that. And I graduated high school in 96. I'm right in. So I remember, I'm very familiar with what you're describing. Just a side note, as art has transformed, was it difficult for you at any way to transition from what computers and technology has changed everything? Yeah. As an artist, has that been a difficult transition, going from what you used to do to now, and everything's on kind of, it's definitely on digital, but it could be on your iPad drawing it out yourself. Like, has there been a transition as an artist that you found? Do you find it easy, or was it difficult? Or,
well, a couple of things. I would say, first thing, that again, doing it, learning the traditional methods, like the old school, like you said, no different than hauling your stuff around. It was a very tactile,
sure.
DIY experience. And at that time, at the time that things started to go digital, so this was 1992, 93.
Oh, wow. I thought it was later.
No, that was
early 90s.
Okay. And like, I was making a good living. And so there was not a whole lot of a compelling reason, like, I'm going to blow up my, entire business model and pursue this. But I was interested in the technology. I totally remember going to this Apple symposium in New York City in 1990 and looking at this equipment. And it was incredibly expensive stuff too. But I made the transition in 1992. I invested in what was then, top of the line stuff. So you had to get a laser printer. You had to get one of these behemoth CRT monitors. Cheats, this thing was like,
sure.
It was like a small car, basically. Right? So it was before the use of internet with design, shortly before. And anyway, I was renting office space. At that time, I was working for myself. Left my last full-time job in 1990. So I was working for myself, and, it was an investment, but I'll tell you, it was, I feel very fortunate because, I, again, born at the right time, learning design, traditionally, the tactile part of it, and knowing, the digital part of it, as I do, and as I have for the last 30 years, gives me a foot in both worlds, right?
Sure.
And I am, I'm a tech guy. I mean, like, I can happily exist with just my phone in my pocket and go about my business. But if I'm away and if somebody asks me for a file, I've got 30 years of archives on Dropbox, which is just an amazing thing. Think about that.
But the foresight in 92 to say, I'm going to embrace this. It may not, maybe we're a little spoiled in 2022, because I feel like new technology pops up every other day and you have to make a choice, right? Like, am I going to go in this direction? But have the foresight in 92 to say, this is the future and I see it. I'm sure a lot of your contemporaries didn't.
Yeah, I mean, listen, again, being fairly young at the time, it was like, all right, all this makes sense. And again, being, able to make that investment monetarily into it and say, okay, it's not only like, this is the way it's going to be. Right place, right time. Again, I can totally remember the first file I ever sent online. So I got myself this, I think it was like what was called a 4800 baud modem on CompuServe. And I had to send a guy a font in Virginia, I think it was, or Maryland, somewhere in the capital. And I'm like, I'm on the phone with the guy. I'm like, has it come through yet? It's been 40 minutes. He's like, no, we got to do this. So you think about that, and you think about the ability as artists to, use an entire toolbox full of a paint box full of colors and be able to reverse decisions. Command Z is a beautiful, beautiful thing.
It is.
And to have,
it is.
So, it's great. I work on a laptop with a big monitor. I work on the iPad with an Apple Pencil as well, able to illustrate on there. And again, all the stuff is great, and I can't imagine it having done it the old way, but it involved rubber cement and like chemicals and X-Acto blades, and it was not safe or healthy or pretty necessarily.
So Todd, you've gotten some big calls. Some people would say, in the world that you're in, the biggest call to do an assignment. Nothing bigger. If you talk to an entertainer, you talk to a kind of a media personality, nothing bigger than the Super Bowl. You've had the opportunity to design the official Super Bowl logo, which was Super Bowl 38. What number was it?
That's right.
Walk me through how someone gets that call and how you feel about it.
Well, I mean, you nailed it. It is, they tout it as the biggest one-day sporting event on the face of the earth. And I don't care who you are. I don't care where you are in the United States. It's a national holiday. It's one of the few things that brings people together, especially these days, right?
Sure.
And there are Super Bowls that even if you're not invested in the sport, you remember who you're with, blah, blah, blah. So it is a very big deal, to say the least. And the ramifications of having successfully navigated a Super Bowl logo, it's kind of like, I've got I'm bulletproof, basically. If somebody comes to me asking to do, an identity for, I'm thinking of, something not even in sports, like, can you do that? I'm like, I designed a Super Bowl logo. I can pretty much do anything, right?
That's like a mic drop. What do you do after that?
Well, but not only that, but you think about, and it is a fact, even, without the inside knowledge of it, navigating the process of creating a Super Bowl logo, knowing that there are so many stakeholders involved with this thing. It's like, what, been there, done that. So anyway, my work with the NFL at that time really came about as the result of having worked with MLB and the NBA, and a lot of, common business partners for what had been a while at that point. And, how there are so many things in our journey professionally and in life itself, which sort of allow for a little bit of a climb to hopefully something that is significant. And that's really the way that took place. So it was quite a process. I was very fortunate.
You got to walk me through the call. Is it a call? Is it an how do you know you get the gig? How do you even know that you're up for the gig? This, I want people to understand, because this doesn't happen to a lot of folks.
Yeah.
So
it was different then too. I will flat out say again, smaller world.
Sure.
A lot of different dynamics, but at that particular time, I had been doing work with the NFL for a couple of years, smaller projects, everything small in the Super Bowl, certainly, but it's almost to some extent like I was, worked up through almost, I'll throw it to another sport, a baseball analogy.
Sure.
You start in the low minors, you work your way up. Eventually you're in AAA, you get the call up to the bigs, and you have an opportunity to, if you're lucky and good, perform on the biggest stage. And that's really how it worked. So my recollection is that at the time there was typically a bake-off, as we would call it in our industry. A couple of people were called into, were commissioned, paid to do, first round sketches. Here is the assignment. The Super Bowl, it's a lot of Roman numerals. Super Bowl logos now, of course, are pretty standardized, right? They are standardized. But at that time, the logo reflected something visual having to do with the city in which the game was being played. So the assignment was, all right, you are going to pursue it should look like this. Here are the colors you're going to use for the most part. Here's what it needs to be. Come back in 2 weeks with sketches. And I navigated the process. What can I say?
Nice. Well, that is amazing. And it's just, again, only a handful of individuals have this assignment. You were able to not only do it, but knock it out. And, for all of the time, like for the rest of history, when you see all the Super Bowl logos, you're going to be able, that's phenomenal. It's just got to be an amazing feeling and an accomplishment. But obviously it's not your only one. You have a number of accomplishments. And one of the ones that stands out not too long ago was an award that you won for a season ticket package, right? For the Chicago White Sox.
Right. Yeah. And so I would say, like, I do a lot of different things. I'm a 5-tool player, if you want to look at it that way.
Sure.
In the sense that I'm a designer, but I'm also an illustrator. I am a typographer. I'm also a writer and an author. But in the case of the White Sox situation, I was called in to design their season ticket package, right? So it's hard
had you done something like that before? Like, is that something that you were kind of used to?
I had designed tickets here and there, but
okay.
A baseball team season ticket package, which was really designed to look very, it was for premium season tickets. So the concept was, here are 81 little pieces of art, 81 home games, contained within a very beautiful box. And the project basically pictorially described the entire history of the Chicago White Sox, 117 years or whatever it was at that point. And yeah, I mean, so I dug deep, and great creative direction from the ball club, a little bit of a marathon of a project, but to your point earlier, and I appreciate you bringing it up, I'm very proud of the fact that it was selected for inclusion into the permanent collection of the National Baseball Hall of Fame Museum in Cooperstown. So it's the closest I'll ever be.
You're a Hall of Famer.
Being a Hall of Famer, Cheats. That's it.
You're a Hall of Famer.
Yeah, in my own way. Right.
Todd, what do people not fully understand, especially the layman like myself? I look at a uniform, I look at a logo, I'll tell you almost instantly, oh, that's good. That's not good. That's hot. That's not hot. I'm a hat collector. I'm like, I want to wear that hat. I don't want to wear that hat. What do people don't understand about the process from start to finish when you're working on, especially on a sports logo?
What a great question. And like, you just like it here's the thing. We have a lot of people making logos and creating uniforms and posting them online. And it's great. I mean, some are great, some are not so great. I am always just amazed at the interest in this kind of stuff, but without disparaging anybody's work or their reasons for doing so, a lot of people don't understand the fact that this kind of stuff is not done in a vacuum. It is a very collaborative process. And as I always say, one victory is usually built upon a mountain of defeats, right? Meaning that for every successful team logo that I've been able to navigate my way through and that has seen the light of day, there are tons that just never got approved, never happened for whatever reason. And again, we talk about professional sports. We talk about the visibility of what this stuff gets applied to, and the fact that it needs to get gigantically big. It needs to reduce down to tiny proportions. There's always a weakest link in the chain in terms of, somebody making a belt buckle with a logo, like those kind of considerations. And the fact that, again, it is a process to just navigate your way through this stuff. And sometimes it can take, a year and a half, 2 years. That's what most people don't, aren't privy to necessarily. So they're not going to know about it. And we are full of visceral reactions. There's no question. We care. I mean, that's the great, wonderful challenge about working on stuff that people actually care about. Sure. I always say, like, you're going to see somebody with somebody somewhere right now has a Washington Commanders logo tattooed on them. Yeah, it's tattooed on them, and like it's a permanent part of their body, right? And somebody thinks that it absolutely sucks, right? So
this is a good segue, because I was going to ask you about a couple of the new logos, in particular the Commanders and the Guardians. But I think I read a quote. I could be wrong, but the feeling that I got was that they could have done anything. I'm a Washington football team fan, and I remember when they announced, "Hey, we're going to call the club the Washington football team," and everybody went crazy and said, "Oh, it's the worst decision ever." Blah blah blah. 2 years later, they're like, "Okay, we're going to officially change the name." Everybody's like, "I kind of like Washington football team. We made the playoffs." Right? Like Alex Smith led us to the playoffs. We're gonna be,
it gained some equity.
Right. It gained some equity. It has some and so my feeling is no matter what that football team would have done, it's gonna be like the 80-20, 75-35. Everybody's gonna say something bad about it. And then, if they win a couple games or people get used to it, they'll be like, Commanders. Yeah. What do you think of the Washington Commanders rollout and new design?
So let's split it into two pieces, right? Because there's the name and there's the visual identity. And the name and the reasons for the club rebranding themselves in every conceivable sense, sure. It's for a reason, right? And again, we can speak to the controversies about this. I'll just go on record with you as saying, like, I always felt that Redskins was a pejorative, horrible name.
Yeah,
and it needed to be changed.
I'm well past that.
Yeah, exactly. And listen, same thing with the Indians, right? I mean, I think sequentially Redskins had to go first. And the moment that this happened in the wake of a massive social justice movement in this country, the moment was right for that.
Sure.
And clearly, if you're a fan of that team, I'm not telling you anything you don't know here.
Yeah.
This is a franchise that has not enjoyed a lot of success in any way, shape, or form for quite some time.
Yeah.
So ripping that Band-Aid off and calling them something other than what they were, I think, good thing. As far as the name Commanders, it's fine. I mean, as you said, with regard to football team, you will have new memories and hopefully successful ones at a certain point in time. Yeah, and you're going to see players inhabit these uniforms, and it's going to become real. It won't just be a theoretical thing. So then we move on to the visual identity, and candidly, and I did make comments about this in the Washington Post and a couple of other online publications. I was a little underwhelmed, I would put it. I felt that the identity was a little vanilla. Could be anything, could be a transit system. There wasn't a lot of football necessarily attached to it.
Right.
Didn't seem like a sports logo. Didn't have a lot of meat on the bones, if you want to look at it that way. The colors, retaining the colors was a no-brainer.
You got it. It's
no-brainer.
It's a must.
Yeah,
you got to do it.
Yeah, and they're great colors too, and that is a way to bring fans along. But the idea of that crest, which had to be reworked,
some controversial on the crest, yes.
Yeah, and it just there's a lot of things disconnected about it. But here too, once you see this attached to actual players running around in actual uniforms, and you get a couple of wins, I suspect it'll look better and feel better.
I think winning will change it faster, right? If the team has the outcome as they did this previous year, coming off a playoff year, it's going to be bad, and the name's going to be blamed for a really long time, right? So yeah. But in the same sentiment, I wrote an article a while back because I really believe that, and I'm sure you've seen this throughout your career, people adjust to change much better than we give ourselves credit for. Like everybody thinks like, oh, if this happens, the world's gonna go, and it's like, no, people are now used to, every expansion team that comes, it's an adjustment period, and now, my son's 7, the Oklahoma City Thunder is normal to him, right?
Yeah, and hey, I was brought in to do the Thunder visual identity.
Oh, I didn't know that.
When the Sonics moved to Oklahoma.
Whoa!
And what I did,
big.
It never saw the light of day. It never saw the light of day.
That was a big challenge because that was a controversial move at the time, right?
Yeah, well, for somebody like me, and again, a great example in your relative backyard, and you touched on it. I was brought in to do the Washington Nationals when the Montreal Expos moved to the district in 2004 into 2005. And, there are great things attached to that. But
Absolutely.
there were some, there were people that wanted to name them senators. And I remember hearing at that time, the mayor of Washington said to Commissioner Bud Selig, Commissioner, this is Washington, D.C. We have taxation without representation. Wow. We have no senators here. And he was right. Right?
I would think the nostalgia alone would have led senator like Walter Johnson, players of that, back in that day, right?
Right. And there were people who wanted Grays in honor of the great Homestead Grays,
right?
Who split their schedule between Pittsburgh and Washington, D.C.
Yeah, the Washington Homestead Grays. And that's, you're exactly right. That's crazy.
Yep. And so eventually Nationals was, people were not, I think people were thrilled to have baseball back in the district for the first time in, I think, 34 years at that point, but we're underwhelmed in some instances by the name and the look of it. But as you said,
now look, we're World Series champions. We're fine.
And I was going to say, what a great thing for me was to have been down there for the World Series. I went to games 4 and 5 at Nationals Park. So in some small way to have been part of this before it was a thing, and to see the enormity of this, and to see sports bring people together of, all kinds of different people, and make them happy. It was pretty neat.
That's awesome. Really quickly, I want to bring it back to what, because what I was saying was about people and change. Was I wrote an article a long time ago that said, look, Chief Wahoo's going to go away and no one's going to care. This is for the Cleveland Indians now and the Cleveland Guardians. And so that's obviously, given the time that we're in March of 2022, we're probably not going to see the Guardians for the foreseeable future, which is a whole nother can of worms. But what did you think when you saw the change from, obviously Washington's football team was an iconic franchise with a lot of history. Cleveland, I'm reading a book now about the 1948 Cleveland World Series because they had Larry Doby and Satchel Paige on a team with Bob Feller and obviously the amazing owner that they had back in the day. So a lot of history in Cleveland. What did you think of the move to the Guardians?
Well, here you go, Cheats. Like, being around for a long time means that I actually knew Larry Doby. Larry Doby worked in the baseball commissioner's office in the 90s. I would be standing there waiting for the elevator, and here comes Larry Doby. And I'm like, unreal. My God, it's Larry Doby. He's just a very nice man, right?
That's unreal.
I also met the man who created Chief Wahoo, a man named Walter Goldbach. I met him in Cleveland in the 90s. He created that logo, that piece of art, when he was 17 years old, and went to his grave, understandably saying, listen, I never meant to offend anybody, blah, 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 blah. Everything converges, right?
Sure.
Wahoo, there were discussions about getting rid of Wahoo going as far back as 1971. So why did it take 50 years? Why did it take? It was, it eventually, the perception is, and I don't think there's a smoking gun on this, but the Cleveland Ball Club hosted the Major League Baseball All-Star Game in 2019. And, it was thought there was a quid pro quo, like the only way you're going to host an All-Star Game, you got to get rid of Wahoo, right? Mm-hmm. And it was going to happen. It was going to happen. And it's a good thing it happened. So anyway, to answer your question, Guardians, I think is a pretty good name. I think Guardians, it's very aspirational. There's a reason for that for people who might be listening who are not aware of it. There's this incredible looking bridge with these heroic Art Deco figures called the Guardians of Transportation, I believe it's called. And that is right, leads right to Progressive Field, the ball club's home. So it has a real great local angle. But there too, it's weird. The name and the logo really kind of like got out there in a big hurry last year. Almost seemed like
I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah, it was very hasty. So there too, not a very robust visual package. It almost seemed like, they kind of shoehorned the Guardians, Indians, IANS, kept the same colors. It kind of looks the same in terms of the lettering from a distance, script versus this jagged thing. I don't know. We'll see how they, hopefully they play, to your point. But there too, you nailed it. Like, people hate change instinctively, especially now where we can opine instantaneously with just the press of a finger on a button. But we get used to things. And I suspect that if the Cleveland Indians have not won a World Series since 1948, maybe the Guardians will do better. And then all of a sudden it's a great thing.
I want to ask you about some of the fun stuff you're doing with the Big Three, and obviously one pretty iconic NBA logo that you did as well. But I'm gonna change gears just a little bit because I can tell just by having a conversation with you that you are a baseball fan, such as I am. And obviously we've lived through so many iterations of baseball, and I actually think baseball is the players and the young stars that they have right now, and if you're talking about Tatis or Vlad Jr. or Shohei Ohtani, they've got this really, really amazing opportunity to really make baseball cool again, to be honest, because I feel like one of their challenges is a lack of coolness compared to the NBA and the NFL.
Totally.
So again, this is a left field question, definitely not in any of your expertise. But that's my question. I'm always concerned when I look at African American, in particular, African American baseball players, and the numbers are going down. I know baseball's throwing a bunch of initiatives, RBI or whatever it is, and the late Henry Aaron was working on a bunch of stuff as well. My question, though, is I tend to think coolness and culture matter, and baseball's just behind. Like, how as someone that is focused so much on aesthetic and design and things being culturally cool, how do we make baseball cool again?
I think a certain amount of it's luck, to be honest with you. So you talk about when you grew up, and a guy like Ken Griffey Jr. is the face of the game.
Absolutely.
And talk about cool, talk about accessible, talk about, thank goodness, clean in terms of the steroid era.
Sure.
Talk about a guy who wore his cap backwards, who
During
had
practice.
so much sizzle and sauce, and was the spokesman for so many different products and very accessible. And that smile was electric. I mean, maybe you need to catch lightning in a bottle like that and get lucky. You make a great point, and you know it. African-American participation in baseball, particularly over the last, let's say, 15 years with kids, with, travel teams, and the fact that the game has become very expensive to play. It used to be like, growing up, where I grew up, we played stickball. You got like a broomstick and a Spalding, like a pinky ball. And maybe if you had like a lawn chair, it could serve as a strike zone, and you go out and play until the sun comes down, right? And
Absolutely.
One of the great things about basketball is the fact that, and we'll get to, big 3-on-3.
Yep.
All you need is a ball and a hoop and three human beings, and you can do it. So I think baseball needs to get lucky. You're right. We have some incredible young stars, Vlad Guerrero Jr., guy like Tatis.
Amazing. Yep.
Trout, who is not charismatic, but
I dismiss Trout.
Yeah, I know.
I mean,
and
Trout
like,
is probably
Shohei Ohtani doing unbelievable things. So baseball sometimes shoots itself in the foot in terms of how the game is marketed. But I think one thing that bears pointing out is the fact that, and like you, I love baseball, but the games are like the quality of the product. I'm just going to say it is just abysmal in the sense that the games are too long. There are too many home runs. The outcomes, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's unwatchable in a lot of ways. And you compare that to watching an NBA game where you get these incredibly compelling personalities who are coming into the arena with all kinds of, they show them, you know what I'm saying? It's like, half of it is, part of it is the game itself on the field. Part of it is how it's marketed, and part of it is luck.
Because I think you're exactly right about Griffey. and I know Griffey's works at MLB and does some really great things now. There's also this streak of players like Bo Jackson, right, and Deion Sanders, and it was like Griffey was like just like all American cool, right, and then there was these like guys that you didn't quite know. They were almost a bit like sinister, right? Like you didn't know how cool they would be.
Oh, there's a dangerous element attached to somebody like Deion Sanders, especially at that time.
Absolutely.
Playing two sports, coming up, like as hip hop is emerging, and a little bit of a different. I always say I'm a child of the '70s, and growing up in New York, I went to the '77 World Series. Okay. Reggie Jackson is the king of New York at that time.
Sure.
That guy just he had a candy bar named after him. Talk about like prominent Black athlete in New York City, the media capital of the world at that moment in time.
Sure.
On the, this, so
that's awesome.
Part of it is there too. I keep saying it, right place, right time.
All right, let's because you have been amazing with your time, and I could talk to you for days about all the amazing work, but I definitely want to hit on two big things. The big three, which is fairly new. Was it year 4, year 5 now?
We're going into the 5th season, and we lost a year because of the pandemic.
And so this is obviously a league that was created by hip hop icon legend Ice Cube, and originally. It's 3-on-3 half-court basketball. Most of it is with players that are really just out of the league in many sorts. I remember because, again, I'm from Virginia, and I'm obligated to mention Allen Iverson anytime Virginia is brought up.
Sure.
But Iverson was one of the, I want to say, inaugural teams. I don't know how many games he got in at the time, but just starting something from scratch, Todd, like the big three has. And really making it a concept and making it a really big product, TV contract, and they're just doing really great things. How did you get involved with the big three, and tell us a little bit about what you've been doing with them?
Yeah, so it was the fall of 2016, so we're going back a little ways, and the people who were forming that league, including Ice Cube's music people, let's just put it that way, found me. They just found me online, and we started working on stuff. And I was, after a very short amount of time, introduced to Cube. We had a phone call. I got an email from him. This is Cube, and basically saying how much he's looking forward to this, how much fun it's going to be. And the thing I always say is, like, people don't realize this about Ice Cube. When he was a very young man, before NWA hits big, before he becomes Ice Cube,
sure.
He's calling himself Ice Cube, but he went to college for what I believe was either one semester or a full year, I'm not quite sure which, to study architectural drafting, okay? So Cube, interested in architecture, interested in design, architecture, music, words. All of these things require certain sensibilities that converge, cadence and rhythm and structure and pace, and thinking about spatial relationships. And so Cube, from day one, he understands all this stuff. So it's one of the great professional relationships of my life. Nice. Not only because Cube is Cube, but because he gets into it and he gets so much joy out of it. I spent the day with him in January. So just not that long ago, late January out in LA. We will usually meet. We meet during the course of the season, and we email 8,000 times a day when things are hot and heavy. But working with him is an incredible joy because it's infectious. His love for this and his critical look at things make me do what I do better. And yeah, and I always thought, I said it before, design is a very collaborative thing. Having somebody as your collaborative partner like that, who makes you better, makes you look at things a little bit differently, and has this big vision, is just awesome. Real quick, talk about Iverson. I was at the initial press conference in New York, January 2017. Iverson's there, and I was under the basket at Barclays in late June 2017 when Big Three kicked off first game. So Iverson played a couple of games, and I went to go see their first practice. Chelsea Piers in Manhattan, and I am probably 4 feet away from Allen Iverson, and I'm just looking. He has these ankles that, like, you ever see, a greyhound, right? Like these
Sure.
incredibly skinny, and I'm like, oh my
man.
God, he looks so fragile. And but to have his excellence and credibility attached to this venture right out of the gate, whether he performed at peak Iverson or not, he was
Sure.
never gonna. But he lent huge credibility to the venture. And one of the teams is called Three's Company. We think about like but it is number Three's Company, like a factory that Allen Iverson, was responsible for.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I have to ask you, because in basketball, almost like the Super Bowl, you have the design for the Basketball Hall of Fame, right?
Yeah.
Like,
and it's
that's insane.
Well, it's interesting. And I actually spoke to him before. One of my dearest friends in the world, a guy named Don Gibson. Don Gibson was a high-ranking executive at Major League Baseball, African-American guy from New York, and he was an attorney there, and he ran the business at baseball for a while. Well, he departed to become a CEO of the Basketball Hall of Fame in 1997, and he kind of like took me with him, and he said, all right, we're going to build a new building, the one that is currently there. It's really like this architectural wonder. And he said, we need a totally new outlook on this. So it was quite a project, working really super closely with him. In just, you talk about starting something from scratch.
Sure.
This was not quite that, but the imperative was to come up with something completely new that honored the history, but really looked forward. And the identity is still in use, which, is astounding to me, because it's been 25 years almost.
How do you decide what projects to take and what projects to turn down?
That's a good question. I am selective. I would say that. I think it goes beyond money. It goes like, at this point in my life, having done this for so many years, you want to work with people you want to work with. You want to work with things that have the potential to have a good outcome, certainly, and that you want to feel proud to be associated with. I think there's, it's those things. Money obviously comes into, we all got to keep a roof over our head, but I want to be involved in, giving some jewel projects. But then again, I do a lot of, I contribute my efforts for charitable purposes. I'll contribute logos to good example would be the Josh Gibson Foundation in Pittsburgh. Yep. Josh Gibson's great grandson is a guy named Sean Gibson, and he runs a charitable foundation in Pittsburgh. And I will always be there for him to contribute a commemorative logo. This year is the 50th anniversary of Josh's induction into the Baseball Hall of Fame. Just did something based on that. So, awesome. You gotta mix it up and do things that go with both heart and head, I think.
So Hall of Fame, Super Bowls, big threes, philanthropy. Is there something that's on your list that you haven't touched yet?
Japanese baseball.
No. Yeah.
I've never been. I want an excuse, Cheats, to go to Japan and soak in the culture and talk, I would love a little bit of a different challenge every now and then.
Sure.
And that would seem like it would be a great different kind of challenge in every conceivable sense. I want to be kind of, a little slap upside the head. Like, okay, you think you know how to do something.
Right.
Rethink it, because you need to recalibrate. So I think it would be a really interesting, different creative challenge.
That's awesome. Now, is there any inroads? Is something going to happen here?
No, I probably know somebody somewhere, but
absolutely. Todd, this has been great. You are not only obviously all the stuff that we've just previously mentioned, you are also an author. I have one of your books here, Winning Ugly. I know you've written some others. It's almost full circle, right? If you started in the book industry and then you're making your own books, it's really exciting. Todd, really quickly, tell people where they can find your work, your books, how they can follow you. We didn't even I actually one of the things that I saw recently that came on my radar was you in this chair doing the interview and talking about Negro League, I guess the collaboration with Lids. I've gone broke buying the Lids Negro League collection already, so you've got a big part of that. But where can people find you?
Yeah, so real quick, just on the Lids front, I do work with Lids as a brand ambassador. Was just out in Kansas City a couple of weeks ago. Sat down and interviewed my good friend Bob Kendrick, who I've known for 25 years.
What an amazing leader. What an amazing
leader. Absolutely. And I've known him for years and years and years. Knew Buck O'Neill a little bit, so I'm a friend of the museum. So to have the opportunity to sit and actually be on the other side of the camera and chop it up with him and be involved with that project. It's called They Gave Us Game. Mm-hmm. And it involves, as you said, the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum, Black Fives, which is all about the early history of African-American basketball, and the great Harlem Globetrotters. So that's kind of cool and great product in there. But to your point, to find me, my website, toddradom.com, TODDRADOM. And that's also my handle on Instagram and on Twitter. And love social media, love seeing what people have to say, especially when it's good. And, really have enjoyed being with you here today.
Todd, thank you so much. Everybody go give Todd a follow, check him out, buy a book, and check out all the stuff that he's doing because it is truly phenomenal. Thank you. This is the Cheats Movement Podcast. We are on the Family Podcast Network, and we will be right back after this.